The self, the way it's explained is that if you simply think of what is that awareness within you in this moment, not in some abstract form, just what makes you capable of being aware, of paying attention, of perceiving, of thinking, of hearing. That consciousness, the Upanishads say, is the self within you. That's the true self.
Hello, welcome to Soul Sessions with Creative Mind. I'm Deborah Burnt Maldonado. I'm here with Rob Maldonado, Dr. Rob.
Nice to be here.
We are excited to continue our series on spiritual psychology. And today we're going to be talking about the avatar and how we use the avatar to connect with the divine in a psychological and also spiritual way. Before we begin, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. If you're watching us on YouTube, just click the button in the corner. If you are listening to us on Spotify or iTunes or other podcast programs, please don't forget to subscribe so you do not miss another episode. So thank you for joining us. And so let's begin, Rob. What is an avatar and how does that help us connect to our divine self?
Yeah, so we're in luck because there's a movie, a couple of movies called Avatar.
Yeah.
And it's the same idea, right? In the movie, they're using some kind of teleportation mechanism to put themselves in these bodies of these blue people. I don't remember the name of the tribes. But that's an avatar, essentially. It's putting a consciousness. In the movie, of course, their human consciousness goes into the body of this alien, and they're able to operate then in that alien world. So in talking about the avatar of Krishna, or let's say Krishna is an avatar of Vishnu, which we didn't mention, sorry, in the beginning, but we're talking about Krishna. Krishna is embodied, and he is representing, that is the divinity that is put in his body as Krishna, is Vishnu, which is the God, a divine deity from Hindu mythology that is much older than the idea of Krishna. So essentially, Krishna is the incarnation of the divine. And that's the process of becoming an avatar, that the divine takes a human form and then is able to reincarnate. Actually, Krishna is only one of a series of avatars that represent Vishnu. And Vishnu is the sustainer God. So you have Brahma, not Brahman, but Brahma, the creator God who creates the world, Vishnu that sustains the world, and then Shiva, which destroys the world.
Oh, great. There's a lot of...
it's reabsorbed into that divinity. But they're all one, aspects of the...
You can't separate them.
Yeah.
You can't separate creation from destruction.
That's right. So anyway, Vishnu comes down to earth in the form of Krishna to intervene in this incredible epic that's called the Mahabharata. And we'll talk about that later in the podcast.
So when we're saying an avatar, it's sort of a way, the benefit of having an avatar is really to be able to relate to this concept of this huge concept of the divine or God or the creator in a human form.
Yes, because we see it in many cultures. So this is one aspect of, let's say, comparative religion, comparative mythology, that we see this idea play out throughout human history, that the God, the deity, is able to incarnate, to take a human body in order to intervene or to teach and to be in the world.
Would that be the same as the myth of Jesus and the idea of, like, in Christianity, of taking the Father and I and the Father are one? Very similar.
Similar, not completely.
Not exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
But you see, like, all religions have the mythology is very similar. You know, the stories and the incarnation of the divine child, all those things. So let's go back to the Gita. The Gita is part of the distillation of the Upanishads in a very, like, kind of I would love the idea of it being the cliff notes. So everything, the Upanishads are hundreds of books. And the Gita is one book, one chapter, I guess, or a song that is helps kind of encapsulate all the teachings of the Upanishads.
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit, because we want to state the approach that we're taking. So we're not taking necessarily the scholarly approach to try to figure out where this literature comes from, its dates and its origins and all that. We're more interested in these psychological concepts. So we're taking the Jungian perspective of comparative mythology to look at what are these myths talking about. And so with all due respects to Hindus and anyone who follows Krishna as a deity, we're speaking solely as students of the mind in the Jungian sense. So there's this epic called the Mahabharata. And the Mahabharata is considered one of the longest poems in human history. It's I forget the count of the verses, but it's supposed to be like if you put all the Iliad and the Odyssey and some of the Homeric poetry together, it would be longer than that. Even all that literature put together. So the Mahabharata is the incredible story of these warring cousins or families that are fighting for this kingdom in ancient India. And Krishna then is serving as an advisor to one side, which is the Pandavas, who Arjuna is one of the primary players in that family. He is the prime warrior, or the principal warrior of the Pandavas. And in choosing sides, Krishna agrees to serve as his charioteer. So the Gita, some of you have read it, we enter the Gita as a chapter of the Mahabharata, essentially when the two armies are on the battlefield, ready to war each other, and Sanjaya is starting to narrate what he's observing on the battlefield to these dignitaries and kings. And that's why it seems confusing to some people. It's like, well, this is a weird way to start a story, but because it's picking up in the middle of the narrative.
It's like you're smack in the middle of, like, what happened before this, and why is he fighting this battle? Yeah.
Yes. And so in that chapter, in the Gita then, Krishna is the charioteer, and Arjuna is the warrior that's on the chariot. He's going to shoot his arrows and fight the battle on top of the chariot, essentially. It was kind of that was the way they did wars at that time.
They didn't have tanks back then.
Yeah.
Or stealth pilots. Yeah.
They had incredible weapons. If you read the Mahabharata, they were looking for these supernatural weapons that had mass destructive powers. So the story then of the Gita, or the divine song, like you mentioned, is that Arjuna loses his nerve when he sees these powerful armies arrayed against each other, and
they're all lined up, right, on both sides, and he's in the middle of the two armies, and he throws down his arrow.
he drops his bow and arrow and says, I can't do this, to Krishna, who is the charioteer, the driver of the chariot.
His advisor, right? The
Advisor, guide, and teacher at this point. So he says, can you take the chariot to the middle, to the very middle of the battlefield? I want to see the whole thing from that vantage point. So they drive to the center of it, and Krishna at that point begins to teach him the divine song, the distillation, like you mentioned, of the Upanishads in the middle of this battlefield, which is symbolic, of course. In the middle of the battlefield, these two people, a warrior and his charioteer, are having a philosophical discussion on the nature of the mind and the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness.
And, well, I think we can relate to it is symbolically in our life, where if we think about how do you fight a war or battle that you can never win? It's the winless battle, because no matter what you accomplish in life, you're going to die. You're going to die eventually. Like, it's like life is kind of that kind of duality in a way. It's you can't really hang on to it. And so how do we work with our mind? How do we live our life when we know we're going to end up not having, it lasts forever and nothing lasts forever? And then how do we deal with that? How do we find comfort? And so Arjuna was thinking, well, if I win, I kill my cousins because their families are fighting. And then if I lose, this side of the family dies. So like no matter who wins or loses, there's going to be loss. And it's like, why even fight? And so we all come to this point in our life where we say to ourselves, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And so that's really, that conversation starts. So if that's something you've had that question before, or will have that question in the future, this is the point where Krishna is giving him advice on, this is how you work with the mind. This is how you overcome these human difficulties and seeing this kind of winless situation and transcend it. The winless situation of being in the body, having the ego, having attachment, and all the things that we have to battle with in our own life. So it's really the inner battle that it's representing.
Yeah, and some people protest, of course, because they're saying, well, isn't Krishna talking about peace and harmony and spiritual practice? Why is he in the middle of a war? And if you read the bigger story, the Mahabharata, you see that Krishna is playing like a trickster role. He's not necessarily trying to stop the war.
He's just kind of I would say the devil's advocate in a way, like kind of like testing Arjuna's resolve on what he wants to do and who he is, and kind of it's just like a coach. The person kind of challenges the client to ask deeper questions of why do you think this choice or that choice is better, and kind of as a guide.
Yes. So because his teachings, the divine song that he sings, these traditions, this narrative was traditionally passed down through chanting or through memorization of these chants. The divine song that he sings at this point is the distillation of the wisdom of the Upanishads. And the Upanishads are much older. They go back to the Vedic period where a lot of the rituals were the emphasis. Then the Upanishads were commentaries on the Vedas that explained the psychology of these rituals. What were the purposes, and how were they enticing the divine to come into human life? So
the Gita is like a more practical, hands-on, like anyone can read the Gita and learn in the modern world. They don't have to do all the rituals. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, in part, because if you read the Upanishads, they seem in tone and in the nature of their teaching, they're very different than the Vedas. The Vedas are essentially very kind of instructions on how to build a fire, how to pour milk over the oblation, and kind of instructions on how to do a ritual in a proper way. The Upanishads, what I imagine and what some scholars talk about is that after a period of intense meditation and kind of withdrawing from the societal obligations, priests, yogis, seers, they call rishis, had these incredible insights, and they do mention this soma, which was maybe a plant or a concoction that gave them hallucinogenic powers.
Oh, wow.
Or that they were able to transcend their ego state of mind and peer into the deeper unconscious mind, what you would call the collective unconscious. So they were gathering information, gathering wisdom from deep inside the collective unconscious, and then writing the Upanishads, instructions, teachings on how to do proper mental disciplines that would allow the students to transcend their ego states.
It's basically to transcend the ego, which is very in line with Jungian psychology, which is individuation, which is the same process of how do I become my true self versus my conditioned ego self.
Very much so.
Very. So let's go back to the Gita.
Yes.
And how does the Gita and the Avatar fit into this?
Yes. So if we read this as mythology, but in the, let's say, spiritual mythology, then we see that, there's this duality, these two warring principles that are instructional in some sense, that if we pay attention and that if we read it correctly, they're there to instruct us, not necessarily just to make us suffer. Because that's one of the primary messages that Krishna conveys to Arjuna, that if you approach this battle as the ego, as your persona, then you're going to experience suffering because you're seeing yourself only in that limited perspective of your ego self. And you're having to fight against teachers, cousins, family members, and kill them. So Arjuna himself says at one point, I don't desire to kill these people. If I kill them and win, I won't even enjoy my victory, right? So Krishna is instructing him to drop his attachment to that ego persona that he's playing.
Yeah, when we talk about a non-attachment, I think a lot of people think it means you don't desire anything. It's your ego's desire. And the ego desire is very limited and all about survival and not from a divine place of growth and expansion. So it's very different. To be non-attached is that when we're attached, we feel like a certain outcome is going to be good or bad. Yeah. And in non-attachment, we don't know what the outcome is good or bad. So we let go of whether it's good or bad, and we just keep moving toward our desires. But every one event isn't going to make or break us.
That's right.
And so non-attachment is one of the keys.
Non-attachment and the continuation of doing his duty. In other words, so notice here that Krishna is not instructing Arjuna to abandon the world, to withdraw into the forest and meditate for the rest of his life. No, he's saying stay and do your duty, but do it as sacred duty. In other words, you continue to play the role of a warrior and do the best you can in the war, but drop the attachment to the results. This was a breakthrough in spiritual practices because what it does, it allows us to stay in the world, to continue to act in the world, but to also reach samadhi, which is that transcendence of ego. And how to, this again was a breakthrough, because before then, the only way to do it was to withdraw from the world. You had to essentially remove yourself from the actions that conditioned you and that created this karmic constraint on you. Karma was essentially a wheel that trapped you. That once you
kind of like conditioning. It's unconscious, and you're kind of trapped in it unless you make it conscious.
Yes. The karmic imprints themselves kind of created this illusory world for you. It was very subjective. It was essentially your own conditioning, your own way of seeing things. And the Maya, meaning the appearance of the world, kind of continuously presented that image of your own conditioning, your own karmic imprints, instead of seeing things as they truly are. So dropping the attachment to the results was a way to free yourself from the karmic wheel, reach enlightenment, but to continue to be in the world.
So it's not spiritual bypassing, where you are using spiritual principles to, the ego is using spiritual principles to further your attachment, which is a lot of spiritual bypassing is. It's like, I'm going to use my desire for money, and I'm going to use all the spiritual tools I have to manifest money. And it's kind of like a bypassing because you're still attached. And the ego's like, I'm better now because I manifested this. And so with non-attachment, we have the desire, but it's always for the money or the love that we attract or the health that we have is always for a higher purpose versus to serve the ego. And that's really the difference. Is non-attachment doesn't mean we don't desire things. It's just that we desire them from a higher place. So desiring money to and fight the battle to start a business or to expand your career can be very sacred if you drop the attachment and you're doing it because there's a bigger picture. I want to express the fullness of myself. I want to make a bigger impact in the world. I want to do this other thing that's going to help others. Is very different than I need to feel important. Yeah. I need to feel safe. I need to feel that money so I can be acknowledged or get attention or all those other things that attachment creates. And that's what causes suffering, is the attachment, not the not having the thing. It's really the attachment to it that causes the suffering.
Yes.
And so let's go back to the avatar. What's the importance of the avatar in this then? How can someone use an avatar? Like, what is this message of Krishna, the teachings, but also the avatar itself? Can someone use that in their everyday life, their modern life, without going on the battlefield with their chariot? How can we integrate an avatar into our life?
Yeah, this is an incredible aspect of the Upanishads. I know of no other literature that speaks this way, in such a profound way, yet also kind of frees us up, liberates us to make our own choices. So it's not saying if you don't believe what I'm writing or what these writings say, you're doomed to hell or you'll be forever in ignorance. It simply says, test these out for yourself. Find a way to apply these and look for yourself. And the great message is simply this, that it says it's very difficult for the human mind to conceive of this cosmic awareness, which is the self, without having an image, without having a kind of a focal point.
I always had that hard, as a young girl, even thinking of God as this man with a beard, and this older man, like it was hard to relate to in a way. Yeah. But some people look at the cross or look at a symbol, but there's something about a human, like someone who's a humanized avatar because we are social creatures and we relate on that relationship. It's a relationship with the divine, not a submission. And I think that's the beauty of the Avatar.
Yeah, so Krishna in the Gita is speaking as the avatar of Vishnu, the divine essentially, the deity, in human form. And then he's saying, if you cannot do this difficult thing of conceiving of the self as everything, right? Because to think of everything, meaning the universe in all its manifestation, not only the outer manifestation, but the inner world of the psyche. If you cannot hold your mind in that difficult position of thinking of the self as everything, focus on me. Focus on me as the representation, the embodiment of that divinity, of that cosmic self.
It's just easier. And you know what I love too in the Gita, he says, I'm your friend. It's like a friend relationship versus, again, not the submissive child, but more the friend, like I'm your friend. And we should think of that divine part of ourselves as a friend to us, not something we have to obey or feel intimidated by. It's like that friendliness, inviting as a part of us.
That's right. And psychologically then what's happening is that as we learn to transcend our ego, meaning we learn to disidentify with this persona, individual persona, ego aspect of our individuality, the question becomes then, who am I, right? What do I focus on? How can I direct the mind if I don't think of myself as this mind body? And there's the answer. You start to identify that friend within, that wisdom within, as the voice of Krishna, who is the avatar of the divine, Vishnu, or even Brahman, right? Because in the Gita, Krishna is pretty much speaking as the true self, as the cosmic self.
I always get confused with all the different Vishnu, Brahma, Kali, all the different deities. Like, it's so much simpler to just think about it as Krishna or some kind of divine image.
Well, the self is the most important concept that kind of emerges from the Upanishads. The self, the way it's explained is that if you simply think of what is that awareness within you in this moment, not in some abstract form, just what makes you capable of being aware, of paying attention, of perceiving, of thinking, of hearing, that consciousness, the Upanishads say, is the self within you. That's the true self. And it's very different than the concept in the West. In the West, we always think of ourselves as the individual within us, the personality. But the Upanishads are saying, the
persona.
Yeah, the Upanishads are saying you're not the personality, you're not the body. These are apparent aspects of consciousness.
Well, even in our dreams, we are other people and have other experiences outside of this. I mean, we have the ordinary dreams where we're like reliving familiar scenes, but then we have these big dreams where we're like in a different planet or a different place and different time, and we're different people, and it's like all that consciousness is us.
Yes.
Like everything in that dream, every character in that dream is an aspect of ourselves. And so it can be overwhelming for people to think of all that, I'm all that. So I think the awareness is a real simple way to think about it, is that there's a part that's aware of everything, of all the dances and movements of life.
Very much so. And that consciousness, which is at the core of you, then is the universal self. In other words, it connects you to the universe completely. There's nothing else you can really be except the universal self.
So Krishna would represent the universal self?
Krishna then represents the path to that realization of yourself as the universal self. That's the key, because
he's more like the guide to, like the helper in like any hero's journey. Like he's like the helper
the
to
teacher,
guide you,
the guide,
the teacher.
yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
So we have this like inner teacher within us.
And the metaphor of him driving the chariot is an apt one, right? He is the self, it says, is the owner and the creator of the chariot. The horses are the senses that kind of pull us into life.
Would you think of the body as being the chariot?
Yes,
with the senses?
yes, exactly. Because the
So our
senses,
physical body is...
without the body, we don't have senses, right there.
And so we have the two parts, the Arjuna, who's the ego, caught up in the world, and then we have the Krishna, which is the higher self, the awareness that's watching the whole thing happen and guiding us. And so even if you're not Hindu or believe it, have these concepts, might be hard for you to grasp, but the idea that you have within you a divine guide that's you, that is you, it's not separate, and that there's an ego self, and those two, it's helping out your ego self. And the ego is actually important because it's connected to the body. As long as you have a body, you have an ego. And this is what the part of us that enjoys the fruits of life suffers when we have loss. And it kind of, we have the whole gamut of human experience that we can enjoy and experience in a deep way, have that spectrum, but then also have this other part of us that's watching. And in the Upanishads, they say there's two birds sitting in the tree, one that eats the bitter and sour fruits of life, while the other one watches in non-attachment. So like these myths are they seem like far away, and we're not in ancient times anymore with chariots and wars, but we want to look at them from a psychological perspective and how they symbolize our own journey to our own divine self, realizing that self-realization or self-actualization of how do we transcend the ego? How do we live in this world and not get so caught up in it that we're suffering? How do we free our mind? And that really is the ultimate key, not getting caught up in the labels, but the symbols and what they represent to us and how we can apply that in our life.
Yes, so if the horses are the senses, driving us to seek the pleasure of objects and the experience the world, it says the reins are the mind. So how do we drive this chariot of our life, our individual life? Through the mind. And yoga is essentially what Krishna prescribes to Arjuna as the way to drive the mind. The discipline of mind, of understanding the nature of the mind, allows you to take the reins of your life and drive it.
So you're not caught up in letting the senses drive you, yes, which is the ego's conditioning, and get in touch with the mind and that awareness, this guide that's saying, wait, let's steer our life in a different direction and be consciously directing our life versus passively reacting to life.
That's right. And the driver, it says, is the intellect. Now, the intellect, the buddhi mind, is this in psychology, we would call it meta-consciousness or metacognition. Metacognition is the ability to think about our own thoughts, to observe our own behavior, our own emotions, our own feelings. So that ability, if you notice, any of you have you practice meditation, you might have noticed that what you're doing is learning to observe your own mind, learning to observe your own thoughts from that detached or non-attached perspective.
Not analyzing, but more like observing without attachment.
Yes, what it means is that if you're experiencing an emotion, you're able to observe the emotion not from the kind of from within the emotion, not being caught up in the emotion, but as an observer, a neutral observer. And that ability has to be cultivated. That's one of the great lessons of yoga, is that it's not going to be there naturally. You have to cultivate it. But everyone has that capacity if you're willing to cultivate it. That you're able to create this sense of observing your own mind, observing your thoughts, your emotions, your own behaviors. Now, what that does is it allows you then to direct your life from a higher vantage point instead of from the conditioned ego. Yeah. And it's very useful because then you do have control of your life and you're able to drive the chariot in a conscious way. So one of the great lessons that Krishna teaches Arjuna is this discipline of yoga, which is
not the downward dog,
mind.
not just that, but the yoga philosophy.
Yes, yoga philosophy. Yes, so what does this all mean for us? Again, if we learn to translate from a spiritual psychology perspective, what are these higher teachings able to tell us about the nature of human consciousness, the nature of reality? Then these lessons become very useful to us.
Well, I know the Gita is very powerful. I mean, Gandhi carried the Gita around with him when he was liberating India from the English Empire, British Empire. When I was first starting out, getting my book Let Love In published, I was going to all these like speaker events and networking events and learning, how to get writers conferences and trying to get a deal. And I carried the Gita around with me, and I kept reading the words, and it's like success or failure is the same. The pleasure or pain is the same. You're all the same in each of these places. And I thought, it really helped, even if I didn't fully conceptualize the whole vision of the Gita yet until years of study. There were certain like phrases that it's like I needed to hear that today. And it really helped me stay non-attached in those moments, especially I was first starting off as an entrepreneur. There's ups and downs. The ego's all caught up in a lot of things, success and what everything means and what your projection is is this going to work or not? And a lot of challenges. It's a battle with your mind when you start as an entrepreneur or any kind of project. And so I found the Gita very, very helpful in just remembering these basic principles, that it's not get caught up in the ego. The ego's the one that's creating suffering and the distortion where you're not even seeing possibilities. So if you can discipline your mind, it helps you have a clear mind so you can see opportunities, you can create more with your life. So it's not just about being spiritual and sitting on a cloud, but it's about really making the most of your life. And how do you use this practical knowledge that's in the Gita and the idea of Krishna as the avatar being the evidence of the divine, packaging, so we can focus on it instead of kind of thinking in the universe. I'm just going to ask the universe for something, and there's nothing solid to relate to. It's like this empty space that we're projecting our thoughts into. We have an image, and that's really the value, I believe, of the avatar, is to bring a personal relationship with the divine. And the Gita is the divine song.
Yes, it's an incredible mythology.
Yeah.
Even if you just read it as mythology and story, I highly recommend the Mahabharata, the Gita, and the Ramayana as well.
So thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next week for another episode, continuing our series on spiritual psychology, talking about these interesting topics. And if you have not subscribed yet, please subscribe to us. Click the button below. And also, if you're listening to us on one of the podcast services, make sure you subscribe, and you can hear every episode of Soul Sessions. But thank you, and hope you join us again soon.
See you next time.
Take care.